The internet, not that you need to know, the internet wasn't working for a while, and it is back, but we're going to do stories. And these are coming from a period of time where I was visiting prisons. I was a chaplain in the prison system in Australia. I was visiting men's prisons for a couple of years, and then quite a few years later, I started going to a women's prison. I was working with Venerable Rabina Curtin. She established a project connecting inmates, mostly through correspondence. So providing them with guidance, instruction, and teachings. The first few times I went into prison was with Venerable Rabina, and I don't know if, I think they were all in Western Australia. Yep. Do you want me to hold it? Okay. Yeah, so I actually ended up visiting quite a few prisons, I think maybe at least a dozen or more, and 4 or 5 of them on a very regular basis. I was never comfortable in there. I don't think you're ever meant to be. And I learned a lot. I would say maybe some of the main things I learned were a deeper trust in innate goodness. And so I could relate to, I could relate to the inmates that step forward from a place of recognizing that we're all innately good. And that's not to say, you know, open the prison doors and let everybody out. I mean, they're there for a reason. And I'm not saying here at all that prison systems are, you know, they're very complicated places. Some aspects of it works, some of it doesn't. One of the first times I went in was with Venerable Rabina, and so I was very, my senses were really heightened, you know, in this space, and I could see that the men were literally sitting on the edge of their seats, listening to the teaching, and really soaking it in, like paying so much attention to her. And then as we left, we were walking across the car park, and I was looking at the time and thinking, I think there's enough time before we have to go to the next place for a cup of coffee. And I'm trying to think, where is there a cafe nearby? And as I was thinking this, Venerable Rabina said to me, the difference between us and them is that for them, they've just had the highlight of their day. They've had the Dharma teaching, and they're in there now thinking about it, contemplating it, and it's coming down into their hearts. But we're so distracted that we're on to the next thing. So, yeah, I mean, and that's how we live our lives. If we're, you know, in the world of barista land, there's so many things to keep us distracted, yeah, and to keep us suffering. So then I started going in, and you know, it took some time to get police clearance, and there was a request from one inmate, and it turned out that the unit that he was in was quite small, and he had some psychiatric issues, Um, but yeah, it was a very small enclosed yard right in this particular prison I went to. I mean, I used to visit 17 different separate units within the prison. They were all very, very distinct. And so this first time going in, because this unit was right in the heart of the prison, I had to walk through a lot of the prison space to get there. And an officer was bringing me in. And so by the time I got to the entrance to this unit, I was really shut down. I was like, I couldn't look anymore. I'd taken in too much. So I was just watching the prison officer unlocking the key, the door to get in. And that's where my gaze was. And into that space came two hands holding a flower. And it was the inmate who was waiting for me and offered me this flower. Genuinely, I have no idea where that flower came from, because this was like in the middle of concrete. I have no idea where it came from. But there was something just profoundly precious about that moment. The next time, years later, that I found myself focused on somebody's hands again was, it was in another prison. This was a maximum security prison, and I had been asked, and it was not that often that the prison system itself would ask me to see a particular person, but on this occasion they did. And they said that the inmate in question, they were having a lot of difficulties with him. He had killed his wife, stabbed her to death in front of their children. And he was wanting access visits to his children. And he was demanding it, saying, you know, I'm their father and I deserve to see them. And they were saying, it's just not going to happen. But he wasn't able to hear this, and he kept insisting. He had written on his admission form that he was Buddhist, and so they asked me to talk reason to him. Now, very often I did not know what people were in prison for. I didn't look for that information. And this was one of the few times that I did know. And I got a little crazy in my mind about what this meeting was going to look like. He hadn't asked to meet me. The prison wanted me to deliver news to him that he didn't want to hear. And I just had the image of his hands stabbing. Every time I thought of the meeting, I had that flash in my mind of this is what his hands do. So when the meeting took place, I had come into the room and I was sitting with my back to the door, and there was a social worker in the room. And they hadn't told this inmate that I was going to be in the room. He knew he was coming into the social worker. And I heard the doors opening behind me, so I knew he was coming. And I just turned, and literally in that moment when I turned, he came around the corner and saw the robes, and he immediately, like, just bowed in respect. And so because I was sitting down, he was standing, the first thing I saw were his hands, which I had already been visualizing. And again, in that moment, I knew that that instinct of recognition and respect was deeper than the stabbing. I didn't actually speak to him when he came into the room. The social worker did all the talking, and she was absolutely fantastic. She completely honored him as a father and acknowledged that, you know, he does have a bond with his children, and that he would, of course, want to meet them and have contact. And then she went on to say, and it just can't happen. But because she fully respected and honored him as a father, he was able to hear, and he could accept, again, he could accept the truth of that suffering. Yeah. In that prison as well, it was actually the first time I went in there. the chaplain that was showing me around, she kind of had a different view about what I was allowed to do. She said I could only see the people who had written on their prison, that it was on their prison records that they were Buddhist, and I wasn't allowed to see anybody else. That didn't happen because I went in on that chaplain's day off, and the prison officers would, literally announce, "Buddhist chaplain here, come on down." And I got to meet many of the guys. But on that first occasion, she took me into one of the prison units, and it was very intense. They, you, it felt like actually like an intensive care unit, but it had a very different vibe. And I think there was about 100 inmates in that space, and it was like a circular space. They're only out for an hour a day inside the compound. And so all of the transactions are happening. They're doing their exercises, they're pulling themselves up and down on bars, there's a lot of noise, there's shouting, and like everything's happening. And so the chaplain called out the, I think there was about 4 guys in there who were Buddhist by birth, and they were Chinese, and I think one of them spoke some English. So she said, "Here are the Buddhists, and off you go now." And we were kind of looking at each other, and then the one who spoke some English came over and said, "We understand that in Buddhism you do no harm. We have to be quite violent to survive in here, so we won't be coming to your Buddhist class." While that was happening, this other inmate came running over, like really excited to see me, and he was like, "Oh my God, I didn't know there was a Buddhist chaplain here, and I'd really like to connect." And as he was talking to me, there was a prison officer walking past, and this young man, John, called to him, and there's this derogatory term. They're just allowed to get away with it. They call officers screw. And so he went, "Hey, screw." And I just kind of flinched, and I could see the officer pulling back, and then John said, sorry, I mean officer. And then went on to have some discussion with him. And then John turned to me and he said, "Look at where I live. How can I possibly make a difference in the world?" And I didn't know how to answer. I was thinking, I was literally so overwhelmed at the whole space that I couldn't answer him. And then and then he said, "Look, I'm sorry about calling the officer screw. I tried to say officer, but the word screw comes out, but I'm working on saying officer." And so I said to him, "What happens when you say officer?" And he said, "Oh, everybody relaxes. I'm more chilled, he's more chilled, he goes home, his wife is more relaxed." And I said, "Well, that's how you're changing the world, through those small actions, that ripple effect is happening." Quite a few months later, with that particular inmate, he was a beautiful artist, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama was coming to Australia. So John got to produce a very nice piece of artwork that was offered to His Holiness. So he had that photo to put in his cell of his artwork being held by the Dalai Lama. Yeah. One time I was walking into a group, and I'd been seeing them for quite a few months. And as I say, with many of them, I didn't know what they were in for. And on this occasion, when I came in, one of the prison officers said, "Stop me," and he said, I want a word with you. And I went into his office, and he told me that he was very depressed, that he was struggling a lot, and he wanted to learn how to meditate. So I had a book which I gave to him, and I said, look, we can talk later. Oh, yeah, sorry. He said to me, I've been watching you. I've seen you coming in. So I'd been sitting with the same group of men for probably 3 or 4 months at this stage. So he said, I've been watching you with those guys, and they disgust me. So I knew then who they were. I mean, in the prison system, the disgust is around the sex offenders. He said, they disgust me, but I can see that something important is happening when you're sitting there talking to them. And that's why he asked me for help. So I went to sit with these guys, and not long after we'd started our session, the prison officer, he was actually way over at the other end of the yard, but he called out and he said, I'm leaving and I just wanted to thank you for the book. And one of the inmates, actually I could feel it from all of them, they were just like completely stunned that this had happened. And one of them said to me, you gave him a book? And I said, yeah, he asked me. And he said, why? And I said, well, oh, he said, that guy treats us really badly. He's one of the worst officers in here. I can't believe you gave him a book. And I said, well, why do you think he asked for a book? And he was thinking for a while, and he went, oh my God, he's suffering. And then another silence, and he went, oh my God, I'm going to have to start thinking about him differently. There was a prison officer, a female officer, who I'd never had an encounter with. And you kind of chose who your time was very limited in there, so you needed very workable relationships with the officers because you needed things to happen quickly. So I guess, you know, I knew who I could work with, and she wasn't one of them. She was very angry, and I often heard her shouting. And on one occasion I went in, and one of my favorite inmates, it turned out, had been in an argument with her. And because of it, he got sent into isolation. And I kind of knew from, and the inmates, they wouldn't say much, but, you know, it was kind of known that she was very reactive, and if you were going to get in trouble, even if it might have been provoked by her, the inmate's going to suffer. So I didn't like her. And I saw her one day walking, I was walking, she was coming towards me, and I saw that in my mind, I don't like you. And then I stopped and I thought, maybe you need to wish her to be well and happy. So I did, in my mind. I said, okay, may you be well and happy. And she stopped and turned and walked over to me and said, I need to talk to you. And we'd never spoken. So we went into an office, and she closed the door and burst out crying and said, my husband has been, he was in Iraq in the war, and he'd come back, and she said, I've lost him. He's so traumatized. And he wakes up in the middle of the night just, you know, screaming, and I just don't know what to do. Yeah. I got to, very blessed to have, at various points, some very special teachers that came into the prison. One of them was a monk called Chodron Rinpoche, Tibetan. He had been he hadn't gone into prison, but he was held under house arrest in Tibet for, I don't remember, it might have been about 20 years, where he literally wasn't allowed to leave his room. And he didn't have any of his texts or anything with him, but he'd memorized everything. Many of, you know, the traditional training was to memorize all the texts as a youngster. So he used his house arrest really well. But as a result of, he was quite ill, and he wasn't able to walk very much. So he was in a wheelchair. So he came into this prison, and I didn't see this happen, but the inmates told me afterwards that in one of the yards there were some wild cats living under one of the buildings. And they absolutely, would not come near any human. But some of the inmates would feed them, and the cats would just come to the edge of the building and eat the food. But when Chodron Rinpoche came in, and he was sitting in his wheelchair in the middle of the yard, the cats came out and sat at his feet. Because the cats did that, I had one of the silk scarves, they're called a kata, which you offer as a mark of respect. And the idea behind it is you're saying that this is, this is our purity, our clean, clear mind, and you offer it to the teacher, and they hand it back to you to say, no, this is yours. So I had trained the inmates who were coming to my class. They knew what to do with the kata. But suddenly the queue was getting bigger and bigger, and all these inmates were going up and offering the kata. And this was because they'd seen the cats. And I'd heard one story afterwards. One inmate said to his friend, go over and offer that guy a scarf. And he said, I'm not offering him a scarf. He's not my religion. And his friend said, your religion so far has been drugs and alcohol. Get the hell over there. And one of the other chaplains told me he'd been working with one inmate who the officers were very skeptical about, because he'd been involved in a lot of fighting on the yard. And so when he started coming to see this chaplain, there's a phrase that they often use saying, he's just in it for the cookies. Because a lot of these interactions, they might get to have, a cookie, which is a big deal in a place that is just devoid of there's very little pleasure. So that's what the officers were always saying, he's just coming because he gets a cup of tea and a cookie. And then, as I say, he'd been very actively involved in gang warfare and, lots of hitting. And one day when the chaplain came back in, the officers were kind of pleased to tell him, we knew that he hadn't changed his ways, and he's just been involved in a fight, and he's back in lockdown. So the chaplain went in to see him, and the prisoner said, look, I had to fight. And this is often the case, that they're locked into, particular affiliations. And he said, I had to fight, but I made sure that I knocked him out with the first punch. So he hit him with compassion. Yeah. And I mean, this is our practice. This is all of our practice. We still make mistakes, but as long as there's we're aware of the discrepancy, and we're working on it. Yeah, we're working on getting beyond the punching. One of the officers told me, actually this one was, he very kindly pointed out to me that I had been ignoring the officers. Some of the time, you just needed to, a lot of the time actually, you just spend time waiting for doors to open, for lockdowns to be lifted, and so on. And so in one of those occasions, I would have gone into the officers' space and asked them to call forward particular inmates, and then I'd just sit and wait. So yeah, one of the officers said, I can see that what you're doing is useful here, but you're ignoring us, and we're suffering as well. So we'd kind of like you to give us some attention too. So I did. I started to spend more time with them. And he told me this lovely story. He said that on one occasion he had to take an inmate to a funeral. I think it was the inmate's mother or father had died. It was a close relative. And so the family wanted the inmate to be right up next to the coffin in the front row, but he was handcuffed to the prison officer. So the family begged him and said, please take off the cuffs. He said, I can't, I just can't do it. So they compromised. They wrapped a jacket around the cuffs so that nobody would see them. So he said, I'm up in the front row with this inmate, and as the funeral progresses, the inmate's crying. And so the officer said, what could I do? I held his hand. So I just love that image of underneath the jacket with the handcuffs, they're holding hands. And many of the officers would speak about those connections, just recognizing our shared humanity. Yeah. So as I said, we were working with Venerable Rabina, so we also had an office where we were distributing books and letters. And one of the inmates came to work with us after he had been released. And he had been on a sex offence, which we at the time didn't realize would mean that the police would come to investigate what was happening in our office, because he was coming to work with us. So they turned up unannounced one night and asked questions about what was happening, what did we do. Honestly, I think the main question that they would be looking for clarification on would be, were there children in the building? But so we did all of the, answered all the questions, and then one of them said, so like, what do you do here? And what's Buddhism about? And I said something, and he said, okay, can I have a book? So he left, and about a week later, turned up at the door again and said that he had been working, he was plainclothes police, and he'd been working in, I don't know what division, but let's say the family division. He would be the first person called into domestic violence, rapes, murders, child abuse, just horrific situations. And he said that he literally, again, his mind, like the soldier, he had post-traumatic stress disorder. He wasn't able to sleep. He was just filled with nightmares from what he'd been exposed to. And he said, I have to be honest, he said, when we rang the doorbell that first night, I turned to my officer and said, here we are, another bunch of fucking do-gooders. But he said, after reading the book, he said, it's the first thing that's made any sense to me, that's helped me to realize that there may be some way of understanding the suffering that I've been exposed to. So he and his co-worker did come to a lot of teachings after that with Venerable Rabina. And it was so lovely to see them. They were such big guys. They actually needed 3 chairs to fit the 2 of them. But it was lovely to watch them receiving the teachings, and to know that, like, you could see them just like, it just all made so much sense to them. And again, I think, like in all of these stories, in some ways, they are so ahead of us, because you don't have to explain the truth of suffering. That's already, and I remember one inmate saying to me one day, yeah, I know that, so what's next? Where like, okay, we got that one, where do we go now? One of the places that I really avoided, we all have our standards, and mine was, I am not going into the criminally insane. I just didn't feel that I could. But eventually there was a request from one of the inmates for me to go in. And the first time I went in there, it was a yard with windows all the ways around, and they were all locked in. But they were literally rattling the bars on their cells and saying, let us out, because they, again, I think they probably had an hour out a day, and this was already 15, 20 minutes into that hour, and they hadn't been released. So they were very keen to get out. And so I'm sitting there in this empty yard with them shouting, let us out, let us out. And I'm hearing it and just thinking, okay, they're insane. And then the yard is filled with, they've got loudspeakers and they're playing this, talkback radio. And it's just like bang, 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 bang. And I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, that's insane. And then I'm watching these prison officers walking through the yard. And these guys are, I've forgotten what they were called, but they were like the much more military ones. They're carrying weapons and wearing padded. They're kind of the riot police. They're called in for very heavy situations. And so I'm watching them walking through the yard and I go like, that's insane. And so this was like this perfect analytical meditation that was happening. I was going through everything that I was experiencing, insanity, insanity, insanity. And it was a process of elimination. And all that was left was my own mind. And then I was starting to think about that. And I'm like, oh, that's a bit insane as well. And as I say, I mean, it was happening in a meditative way in the sense it was like I was thinking about this and I was knowing it to be true, not just hearing, oh, yeah, that's probably right. It's like, oh my God, it's true. And I had a Dharma book, so I'd gone through this analysis and then I'm looking at the Dharma book and I'm thinking, that's the only way out of here. And I'm so focused on that being true that I didn't notice. And I looked up, the yard was full, and all the inmates were out. And there was one sitting opposite me, and I'm like, oh, hi. And he went, now I'm a complete beginner, so I'm going to start with some really easy questions. Who are we really? What is our purpose in life, and why are we here? I'll get back to you on that. So I did go in there regularly, and most of the guys, I mean, they really were occupying very unique worlds. And it was a very grim place. They were actually building a new unit, so this one was just being left to deteriorate. So it was very, very down. And I remember one of the guys in there, they all had their patch that they would walk. And this one had this particular patch, and it was just like from here to here. And he would turn and back and turn and back. And I never saw him outside of that patch. But one day I walked in and I'm waiting to connect to whoever I'd been in to see. And I saw him turning towards me. And so he deviated from it and he came over to me. And he said, we're all in the desert. It's just that some of us don't have to walk as far as others to get to a source of water. But even as we're drinking the water, we're thinking, where's the next water coming from? And then off he went again. Never came near me again. Another time in that unit, I had access to a video recorder, and I was I'd selected a particular teaching from Lama Yeshe, and that particular CD started off with a very general teaching, and then it went into Tantra, like some very high, basically teachings that I thought, well, when we get to that part, I'll hit the stop button. So the guys came in, I hit the play button. The CD will not start at the beginning. It jumps right into the middle of the tantric teaching. And I'm, no. And I keep hitting the rewind. It's like, no, we're starting here. And in the end, I'm just like, I have to do it. There's nothing else I can do, and we're running out of time. So I hit the play button, and I'm sitting at the back. And as the teaching is happening, I'm literally just like, oh my God, what are they going to think at the end of this? How am I going to deal with this? And so I step forward very nervously and turn around and look at their faces. All I can tell you is that the insanity was gone. I saw these clean, clear, open, loving faces. And one of them just gave me very succinctly what he had just heard in the teaching. Like he was like, so he just said, da, 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 da. Is that right? And I went, yeah, it is. And he went, yeah, I thought that's what I heard. And again, you know, the clouds will come in again, but genuinely, like, no doubt, I saw them free of their insanity. Yeah. One young man, when I was visiting him, he was in lockdown, um, in solitary confinement, in a very grim place. They were allowed out for, and most people would be, depending on the prison, but in many situations it would be 1 hour a day. And for them, they didn't get out into they got out into another concrete space, and they were locked into a cage. So it was just an outdoor cage in a little concrete space. They never saw any greenery or anything. And he'd been in there for many months. This is a sad story, I'll just tell you this. And sad, and anyway, there's a sadness to it. He was a beautiful artist, and he really loved the teachings. He particularly loved His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and anything I gave him, he was like so, just loved it, loved everything that he could get his hands on. And he had a grandmother who was the only person I think in his life who was very supportive of him, and she was sending in some material as well. And Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo was able to come to the prison at very short notice. And so I ran into him to get him ready for the visit, and I said, look, she's coming tomorrow. Would you like to draw her something? Could you do her something? And he was a bit nervous, and he went, oh, I'm not sure I'm good enough and whatever, but he did. And he made a very beautiful image for her. He had been showing me his artwork prior to that. And you know, these guys have very, very few possessions. And he kept all of so he was making all of these really beautiful images of Buddhas, and he was keeping them in a book, the only book that he had in his cell that was big enough to hold these beautiful images. And it was a pornography book. So he was opening this book of pornography to show me all of these lovely Buddha images. And, you know, I was sort of trying to be very focused on the Buddha. It's like, oh, that's lovely. Yeah, very nice. So he was very taken with meeting Jetsunma. And I gave him a book, her biography, Cave in the Snow. And when I came in to visit him after he'd started reading the book, he was really upset, because in the book, Jetsunma talks about her teacher dying young and unexpectedly. And Jetsunma was very shocked when he died. And when this man had been reading the book and got to that part, he said he got such a shock. He threw the book across the cell and just burst out crying. He said, that shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have died. And he couldn't touch the book. And he eventually was able to pick up the story, but he had to fast forward, he said, at least 10 pages. He didn't want to read more detail about this death. I didn't know what he was in for. And he had often said to me that the people he really despised in the prison system were drug dealers. He thought they were scum of the earth, and did not like them. Well, it turned out that he was a drug dealer. I did not know. And how I found out is that after he left prison, his grandmother rang me to say that he had committed suicide. She said that his shame at being a drug dealer was so great that he just couldn't live. And when they found his body, he had cave in the snow at his heart. So the grandmother rang because she wanted a Buddhist funeral for him. Yeah, so that's. I do wonder, what happened next. Shouldn't end on that note. I was in a cafe one day, and there was a newspaper in front of me, and I just flicked it open, and I was like, oh my God, that's my friend, one of the inmates. But that was my first thought, oh look, it's him. And then I kind of pulled back, and like, oh, it's him, getting out of the back of a prison van, and gangland murderer facing trial, and oh, okay. But it was a very beautiful recognition again of his true nature, being able to see him as, this is my friend, we just had this wonderful conversation. He'd asked lots of really beautiful questions trying to understand reality. And like that's your ultimate truth. And then the conventional truth has him appearing in a tabloid newspaper for gangland murders. Both are true. Yeah. Might be the end of it now. I took notes trying to remember these stories. Recently, I had been, as I said, I was going into the women's prison, and there was one woman in there. She was confined to, again, a very locked down unit where she had no access to the general yard. And they had half an hour a day out in the yard. And in that half an hour, they had to queue up and get their meds, their medication, which often took quite a lot of time. So, and I was in there once a week, so we literally saw each other for 5 minutes a week. But I was feeling like she was crossing boundaries with me, and that she was being over-friendly, and I wasn't comfortable. And I remember thinking, like, Aileen, it's 5 minutes a week, and it's probably really a very important 5 minutes for her. So maybe she's trying to get, as much closeness as possible in that time, soak it all in. But I knew what she was in for, and I was having problems with that. And it was a very heinous crime, and I just wasn't comfortable. So I actually wrote to Jetsunma and said to her, I don't know how to deal with this situation. And I explained the thoughts in my mind about it. And Jetsuma's response to me was, Aileen, just be kind to her. And these are simple words, and they're true, but I wasn't able to hear them until I think I had done that purging, that I was able to be honest and acknowledge everything that was blocking me from being kind. And then to also hand it to a teacher that I trusted. So going through that process, I think, just made it very easy for me to go, oh, of course, just be kind to her. Yeah. And it did lift everything. Yeah, it made it. What it also did, actually, was allowed me to have respect for her. And I didn't up until that point. But after that, I did. I had respect for her. Recognized that all of this actually is being triggered too by the Call Me By My True Name, you know, doing that poem earlier. I was thinking back. And so I'll end on this story, which was actually going back to that group of um, the prisoners who, in the sex offenders yard. And it turned out I was actually going through there's a lot of units in that particular prison that are sex offenders, high percentage. So I was sitting with this group. So I'd been with, they were probably my longest standing group, and we'd been together for a year and a half or more. I'd see them once a week. And I do feel love for them when I think of them, really, yeah. This is another side story on them, but one night I was reading through a meditation, and I got to the point where it said, all your problems are trivial. And as I read it, I knew it to be true. My friend calls these blinding flashes of the obvious. It's like, oh my God, it's true. And I couldn't speak. I'm just like, so time is passing, and then I hear one of the inmates whisper to his friend, I think she's having an epiphany. And I just looked up and he went. So yeah, this other night with them, a very, very disgusting case of a sex offender had hit the media, and there was a lot of there was a lot written about it, and it was quite shocking. And I found myself drawn to it, and I'm sure we all experience this to some extent or another, where there's something about the suffering of others that can be sensationalized, and that we kind of, well, I mean, look at the entertainment, you know, where we feed off it. And I found myself feeding off it, and unfiltered, I was soaking this in. And when I was about to go into the prison that evening, it kind of all hit me. I had been like reading too much about it, and I sat in the car and I just started crying and crying and crying, and I thought, I cannot go in there and sit with them. I can't. But I forced myself to, and when we were sitting together in the circle, I couldn't speak actually, and we did have access to a video player, so I played teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And they knew, I'd like to know actually what they thought was happening for me, because I was very different to how I usually was with them. And I could feel them kind of holding me, you know, we're not sure what's going on here, but we'll just, you know, we won't push anything. Because I had that almost like, don't even look at me, don't talk to me, don't ask me questions, we're all going to watch the Dalai Lama. And so I'm sitting there with my eyes closed, trying my best not to cry, and I'm hearing His Holiness, and I'm telling myself over and over again, you are sitting in a circle here, you are all the same. You all need to take refuge in exactly the same way. There is no difference. And I think what had happened for me was that up until that point, I really did think I was different. I really did think that the crimes that they had committed and the people that they were separate from me. That I was better than them, and that I needed to be better than them. Otherwise, I couldn't sit with them. And that was just like, that was gone. And I was sitting in my own shit. So, do I finish on that note? Maybe just leave it with that. in Thich Nhat Hanh's poem today, he was talking about joy and pain, you know, that they're, you hear them, you're thinking, can you put those two words in a sentence? Joy and pain, do they come together? Um, and I would say they do. The, when we can finally, honestly allow ourselves to stop running and to, to see the truth of our suffering, um, it breaks us open into joy, because joy is the natural expression of our um, just of who we really are. Yeah. You hear this as well with people who go through illness, you know, severe illnesses. You often find, if you're meeting people in hospital settings, that's, you can find that phenomenal joy and courage in those spaces as well. So it would be good if we could wake up to this without having to go through those sorts of severe suffering, really. And we can. Yeah. So that's it. They're your bedtime stories. There was another question from earlier today. So just to finish, you know, I'm so grateful to all of them. I learn. I mean, they've been such profound teachers for me, and it's been a privilege. I did a couple of months retreat many years after going into the prison system, and I found the inmates coming up very easily in my practice. You know, when you think about may all beings be happy, and I was able to connect with them again in a way that they were still, like those relationships are still teaching, they're still helping me to wake up. And there's something very beautiful about that. When we, you know, I love the phrase, we're walking each other home. And this is the power of Sangha, of community, when you come together, trying to figure out suffering, trying to figure out what's going on in the world. There's a profound support in doing it together. And we will keep showing up for each other and taking care of each other, walking each other home. Yeah. So, and somebody had asked me, like, why did I agree to do this retreat? And definitely from my experience I did 2 last year, I have that memory of it, of like just being so moved by the fact that you want to try and figure out your own minds. It's really beautiful. And it's a privilege to be looking at you all while you're trying to do it. Yeah. So in that way, I kind of got the best seat in the house. Yeah. But also a scary seat, like, you know. So may you connect with these, you know, may all these teachers come and find you and, yeah, help you home quickly. Okay. So we'll dedicate the practice, dedicate the merit from our day. And so in doing a closing dedication, this is sealing it, as in not sealing, but sealing, stamping it. One way of describing it is like, I mean, the merit that we have created, in the scheme of things, it might be, you know, like a drop of water. But if we add the drop of water to the ocean of merit that has already been created by all these amazing beings, and everybody who turns their minds towards virtue, then it, yeah, it increases exponentially. And it doesn't get lost. Yeah. So it's really important. I mean, yeah, important to set our motivation, do the practice, and do the dedication. These three are very important. By the power of this compassionate practice, may suffering be transformed into peace. May the hearts of all beings be open, and their wisdom radiate from within. Thank you, and good night.